OSCQR 30. Course provides activities for learners to develop high order thinking and problem solving skills such as critical reflection and analysis. So this is an RSI, so it's required for level 3. It's required by the DO as well as accreditation, I'm sure. And what this actual practice talks about is it talks about active learning, critical thinking during active learning activities for your students. It also talks about critical thinking when you're working with materials, whether it's formative or summative in the course. It also talks about alignment. So what this really means is we need to take a look at the alignment in the course between your assessments and your outcomes to make sure that they are mostly in the right place according to Bloom's taxonomy. That's what we're going to be looking, and that they're measurable for your course. So what we're going to be taking a look at, the two practices for this one, aligning the course assessments to course outcomes, using reflection activities as debriefing, and we're talking metacognitive skills here. So first of all, let me share with you the course assessment map. When you're talking about aligning your course outcomes, it's also a time for you to reflect on your course. Sometimes when you're teaching for a long time, some things get out of whack from the original alignment of the course because you start thinking of new ideas and new activities and new assignments, and sometimes that alignment just gets a little out of skew. The other thing that happens is that we're doing a lot at the college right now. So we have working on SLOs, which is the student learning outcomes for general education. And some of you may have courses that are general education requirements or have that, fulfill that requiremements. Also, we're really talking about transferring, right? All our courses transferring to URI and making sure that those courses are aligned with those transfer goals. We also may have internal goals as well for accreditation, both health, human services, business, also computers, CSIP, are all aligned with their own accreditation and requirements for certification and licensure, aligning your course. And sometimes those get askew. And also, when the course outcomes originally designed way back when, we may not have taken into consideration some of the things because some of the certification is updated. This is a Excel spreadsheet that I've created. So the course assessment map it's an outcome distribution map. So what we're looking to understand is that what are the formative assessments in the course and what are the summative assessments of the course. And so this is what I'm doing here. This is an example. And here's all this assessments. Obviously, this course is very simple. There's not a lot going on. So we made the example simple. And I put an X in the box where it aligns to the different levels of Bloom. So you need to understand what your course outcome is looking at. Once you understand how it spreads out, you need to think about critical thinking skills. So this whole thing is about critical thinking and getting them into the upper levels. So you got to look at where are you clustering in your course? Are you clustering in the critical thinking, which is apply to create is really where we want them to be. Obviously, you have to have some remember and understand and applying in the course. You have to have some of that because it's a new topic. You're building a foundation. And you start to get into up these levels, right? You're getting to the later on in the course, you're getting into the analyze, evaluate, and creativity, right? Do this mapping and just about everything you have is in these first three. Then you really need to think about the critical thinking that's going on in the course. How are you challenging students to think deeply about the different things that they're doing, the activities that they're doing in a way that supports analyzing, evaluating, and creating. Once you have a spread, so we have a nice little spread, a diagonal line, which is, something that you should see when you do your distribution, something very similar. It's okay if it's not perfectly exact. You can then put your point values or your percentages, however you're doing your course, in this last column. And what it will show you is the distribution of points according to the level of blooms. And what we want to see is we want to see the majority of the points up here in the critical thinking part of your course. That's where the presentations are, the final papers are, the midterm finals, all those kinds of things, those activities that are happening in the course. We want them there. We also want to see all the formative assessments, right? Probably down here, quizzings, discussions, drafts, right? They're in the lower levels of these classes as a formative. And so really, this is what alignment is all about, is making sure that you have a distribution in your course of activities and assessments from week 1 through week 15, where you have some distribution level and a heavy emphasis of critical thinking in the upper levels. And that your point distribution is make sure that it is on that heavy side within those top 3. So that really is the first part of OSCQR 30. Here's the real part of that. Let me see. Get the courses. Yep. Now we're going to talk about a flow of an activity. So when you present an activity in class, there are stages in which you work through, and this is called scaffolding. We're scaffolding the activity. Everything is scaffolded. And what that looks like is first the students are given some sort of advanced organizer. Now, an advanced organizer is you're reading the chapter or doing a little bit of homework before they do the activity, right? They're being introduced to new content. They're watching your lecture video. All of that it could be your advanced organizer. Then you introduce them to the activity. There's a description, you give them instructions on what they're going to do for their task and how to do it. You tell them the due dates, you give them the rubrics and examples. Once the activity is done, students really require an active activity wrap up where they're summarizing what's going on for themselves. And you usually do this by an assessment. You usually have them submit a paper to you, draft of paper, or submit some sort of lab report, or submit a bunch of problems, or submit draft code. So that's our students giving us some type of evidence of work in mastery. And then once this is done, students need a debrief. Now, a debrief period is a period of reflection. Students need a little time to think about what they did, what they passed in, and they really need that feedback from you, right? The grade and the feedback to really understand how well they did and how well they understand why they did it and what they did wrong or right, what they need to improve, right? So this is our debrief period. Now, the activity complexity, as the activity complexity rises, there is more and more need for a complex debrief. In active learning, when you do some of these active learning are going to require a debrief for the class to share what they learned and a chance for you to summarize what was going on. So what is debriefing? Debriefing really is a guided discussion that draws out their reflection on the experience, whatever that experience is. It also reinforces the learning a second time in their brain. So we're starting to move from short to long-term memory. It corrects misconceptions, which is really important. So it gets a chance for you to hear the voices of the students and correct them before you move on or before an actual summative assessment. It also takes active listening from the students because they're participating in that discussion. They're listening to people and they are trying to understand and rectify it to what they know, right? Somebody shares what they have experienced and then trying to compare it and contrast it with what they experienced for it. They get to share their different perspectives. They share their opinion. They share their way of doing things. They share what they learned. There's all kinds of different ways you can share what they learned. And this overall is a reflective practice, which triggers the metacognitive skill set we want them to have about how they learn, right? So this is how we teach them about how they're learning and how they can improve their own learning in the course. So it all comes back to the social inquiry model. So the collaborative inquiry model, it has multiple names. And where we have social presence, cognitive presence, and our teaching presence in a course, we've all talked about this before, and what kind of environment it makes. And so this is a detail about this theory, and you can see debriefing is really in the center. It brings everything together so the student becomes cognitive of what they have learned, which is often sometimes missing when you get questions of, I don't understand. I didn't learn anything. What were we supposed to be doing? The debriefing really helps give them time to reflect on their learning, and they understand what has happened. So depending upon the debrief, usually it goes after an activity. Students have time to think about what they learned and what they did. The pedagogy of the debrief can be complex activity, it is sometimes called a summarize or a takeaway. So it helps them process greater connections with the learning and the overall course goals. You can reaffirm that. You can go back to, this is why it's important that we do this every week. So you're reinforcing what's going on in the course. And then secondly, those activities that are most commonly used in reflective online activities are blogging and journaling. That is the most common. However, there's a billion ways you can debrief your course. You can use discussions. A lot of people use exit tickets or muddiest point activities. And if you're really short on time, sometimes just you summarizing what they should have gotten out of the activity helps them understand and debrief and reflect. Any questions about that? Anybody need a refresher on exit tickets or muddiest point activities? So not every activity needs a complex debrief. Focus on the activities where you're making big picture connections. So in those areas where things are coming together, where you're bringing multiple topics together, multiple different skills together, that's when you're going to concentrate, bringing them through that loop and giving them a complex debrief. And that could be your discussion for the week, right? Ask them about a reflection. You can also, we have a journaling tool, which is an excellent tool. It's a conversation between you and just the student, where you are just having a conversation. These reflective activities do not need to be graded. You can give feedback as needed to correct misconceptions or to boost the student's confidence, or tell them, use them as a social construct in the course. OSCQR number 40, which is course provides learners with opportunities for course interactions to share resources and inject knowledge from diverse sources of information with guidance from the instructor. This is also SRI, part of the SRI package for this. And so for this particular standard, what it means is having activities, active learning activities in your course that reach beyond the publisher material and assigns either readings or activities that brings in a wider scope and perspectives. But we're going back, right? Last time we talked about real world impact, real world application, real world references. And this is, here we are again. Wider scope of research and perspectives. It's your chance to bring in more about the field, about what they're doing, how it applies to their majors, all that kind of things. Really, we're talking about taking real world experiences, having the students bring in outside sources, and then it's a chance for them to vet those sources. So library loves this. When you have information literacy within a course, and you are having the students determine whether or not the source is valid, is really an excellent part of any activity. So how do we do this in practice? So there's actually multiple ways of doing this in practice. One is allowing diverse perspectives of voices in your source content. Sometimes it's easier to do in some subjects than others, of course. Is getting outside voices into the courses, getting, especially in literature, adding in the conversation from diverse perspectives, time zones, different international literature, bringing in activities that allow students to share their own voices. That is considered part. So where you're giving them a voice to share their own ideas, opinions, brainstorming, that's all considered part of this, and it qualifies. So if you have parts where they're brainstorming and they're looking up outside references, that is what we're targeting here for this, is bringing those opportunities and then having them reflect on those in your course. Activities for students to find outside resources. So anytime you say, go out and find 2 outside resources for this paper, that's what we're triggering. We're triggering that perspectives, multiple perspectives, and allowing students to think about the material and then validate that material. Information literacy. Activities in which students critique outside materials. This is great for art, music, performance. It's also good for giving them examples, case studies of code, case studies of law, case study of history. It's great for languages, where they're critiquing somebody's translation of parts of language. So it really helps in all different areas of the college here. Teaching is another one. When you're doing teacher prep, allowing outside critics and providing outside materials as well. Summarizing and annotating, blogging, annotating an existing piece of code, making observations, citing personal examples, creating collections of resources. So there's Diego, there's all kinds of bookmarking apps that are free to students, so you can make collections. Having them ask key questions and letting them lead discussions, having them do a pro and con position, annotating bibliographies, debating, having them debate on a discussion board, using students posting outside sources in the discussion. You can say, I want you to get an outside quote, an outside course source in this discussion board this week. That's also a great practice of MLA or APA. Disagreeing with the instructor in ways that promote further exploration of the issue, which is great. This often happens in art and music and performance, where the students may agree or disagree with a group critique, which happens quite frequently in those areas as well.